Good evening, everyone. Am I on? I am on. Well, we're glad you're here. Thanks for sounding like you were enjoying the mingling. Some of us were talking about how sometimes that kind of mingling actually is stressful for some people. We're glad you're here. We're glad it suited John for this weekend. When you're planning things and sometimes doors get slammed shut and you're just not sure if you're doing the right thing, and then other times the doors just blow wide open and things fall into place and you're like, thanks to the Holy Spirit for just guiding and bringing all this together and making it happen. So I know with spring activities ramping up, the days are filling up quickly, and so just thank you all for taking the time to be here. I think in the past 2 years, we've all learned a lot. We've all learned different things, but we've all learned a lot. And I think one thing in particular that has been brought to the forefront is that our mental health matters. And that mental health is not something to be ignored or belittled. We had 60 people sign up for this, and we probably have 60 different reasons for why we're here. And for whatever reason you are here, whether it's for yourself, for a friend, for a loved one, whether you're struggling, whether someone else is going through a dark time, a tough time, and you just want to learn more, that's our goal for tonight, is that we'll all learn something, we'll all gain some insight, some hope, and some encouragement for going forward. So just a few comments about the evening. If at any time you need to get up and go out and get a drink of water or more chocolate or whatever, please feel free to do that. We want you to feel comfortable, but if you just need a break, that's totally okay. This is an informal thing, so feel free to do that. In the folders that most of you have probably picked up, you'll find the copy of the schedule for the weekend. Yeah, and if somebody needs a folder, we'll grab some extra folders and get them to you. Or if you need a pen, there's also pens in the pews. So you'll find the schedule, you'll find note paper for taking notes, and then note cards. And the note cards are for asking John a question for a little bit later in the evening. So feel free to write some questions out, and then we'll take a break and later collect those, pass them on to John, give him a chance to look through them. And I mean, in all honesty, some of our questions may be answered before we even ask them, as John talks. So, so if you don't have a folder, you don't have a pen, just Steve's coming around with them. And then in case you overlooked it or whatever, tonight's event is free of charge. But if you feel so inclined, you can make a donation to the Compassion Fund of Spring Haven in order to help others. And if you want to write a check for that, you can make that out to Sonnenberg Mennonite Church. So on behalf of Adult Ministries who organized this, thanks again for taking the time to be here. And for John Bohley, too. Thanks to you for taking time out of your weekend. So John Bohley from Spring Haven Counseling Center. And basically, I'll turn it over to him, and John can give a little bit of an introduction of himself, and we'll get started. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Yes, and again, thank you, everybody, for coming out. I know, man, there's a lot of things you can do on the weekend, on a Friday night, and that you're interested in coming out and hearing about mental health and learning more, either for yourself or for supporting others. That means a lot. It's exciting for me to see this many people that interested. Before I start, let me just open with a little bit of prayer. Lord, thank you for this space, for the hearts here that came to listen. I just pray that you speak, that this message be about you, not me, not about Spring Haven, but what you have to say about mental health and helping people. I pray your blessing on this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, yes, so my name's John, and I'm the clinical director at Spring Haven. I've been at Springhaven for about 8 years, and before that, I was a therapist, an outpatient counselor, therapist, for 16 years. And so, if you count my school, some people are like, he's not that old. If you count college, and then I did my graduate work at Ashland Seminary, I've been intentionally studying mental health as my full-time focus for the past 24 years. So it has been a big interest of mine, which is why I'm so thrilled to have so many people here. I'm married. I've been married 18 years and have 3 children. My daughter's at a JO volleyball tournament this weekend, and a couple of younger boys. Yes, so sometimes I'll get the question. I get the question a lot. Man, what made you decide to be a therapist? Like, why would you want to do that? Boy, I could not listen to people talk about their problems all day long, right? Like, I get that question. My septic system malfunctioned a couple of weeks ago, and I called a gentleman to help. I have no idea how to resolve that. I called a gentleman to help fix it for me. He spoke at length and with passion about septic systems, which he does full time, and I could not do that all day. So I do what I'm able to do. I grew up in a Christian home. My dad's a pastor. He's a United Methodist pastor, retired now. But I grew up in a Christian home. It's actually a little bit of irony that I'm speaking with you today, because a big reason I did not want to be a pastor is I did not want to speak in front of a bunch of people. And so it is with some reluctance that I agree to speaking opportunities. But yeah, I grew up, and I sort of had the question in mind about how to love people. I would think of, so for example, Matthew 22, 37 to 40, right? When Jesus was asked about the greatest commandment, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your mind, and with all your soul. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the laws and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Okay, all right. So even as a pretty young person, I was sort of, okay, love God, love people. Like, how do you do that? What does that mean? So I tried, I did a few different jobs growing up, right? Like, I worked road construction, I did factory work, I worked for like a hotel laundry service, did several things, re-roofed some houses, none of which was I particularly talented at. But even in high school, classmates who I wasn't even super close friends with would talk with me, and they would open up when they would talk with me. And I found that people often felt better when they were listened to, and I kind of enjoyed that. So I began to discover, I think maybe I'm a good listener. Maybe there's something I can do here, right? And so I just kept exploring it. God kept confirming as I explored, but that's sort of what then drew me into the mental health field. And in the mental health field, I've worked at in different settings. I've worked in community mental health, in Millersburg, and Worcester, and in Medina, and small amount in Elyria, and then most recently, here at Springhaven. I'll talk more about mental health specifically tomorrow. Today, what I want to talk about more is stress. So, has anyone here ever experienced stress? Right. Yes, man, it's been a stressful time. So I think obviously with COVID, there's been a heightened amount of stress. But I want to give a little bit of a model for thinking about stress. And I should say my plan for today is I'm going to talk a little bit about stress and a model for stress. Then I'm going to talk about some self-care ideas, some things to think about with self-care. And then I'm going to leave some time for questions. So we'll keep it pretty simple, I hope. I am going to draw a little while I talk. I am not an artist. Like, there's a good reason why I'm not an artist, but it'll help get the message across a little. So everybody has stress. I'm the type of drawer that after I draw it, I have to tell you what it is, or you wouldn't know. All right, that's a cup. All right. And specifically, it's a stress cup. And everybody has a stress cup. And the way the stress cup works is that every single day, stress comes in. So you have to get up and get dressed. You have to do chores. You go to work. You need to, every single day, stress comes in. When stress comes in, your stress level goes up. Okay. When you get those stresses resolved, the stress goes back down. So the sink is full of dishes, stress is up. I get the dishes done, stress back down, right? Like it hasn't happened yet, but soon. The grass gets tall, right? Stress goes up, get it mowed, back down. Now, there are stresses that come in that don't get resolved very easily. An example might be, I'll write it here, but I'll say it. Relationship conflict. Okay, so most people, if you can't see this very well, I'd say move up. This is what I'm working with. We've probably all had experiences where at some point or another, we had some amount of tension with another person, right? Some amount of conflict or tension with another person. And even though we didn't think about it all day long every day, right? We still went to work, we still did our other life things. That tension was somewhat there, right? And then either like we apologized or they did, or there was some amount of forgiveness or healing in that relationship, and it felt like, a weight came off, right? Oh, that felt better. Oh, that's nice, right? But that whole time that it is not resolved, the stress is just sitting in here, right? The stress doesn't stop happening, right? Like, you still have to do chores, you still go to work, life is still happening. So then the stress just sits on top of it, right? And there are lots of stresses that may not resolve easily, right? I can give a few examples. Guilt, this sense that, man, I have done something wrong or wronged somebody, and that's sort of sitting with me. Resentment, the sense that I've been wronged by someone. Sometimes medical issues. Either I'm at a phase with something medically where I don't yet know what it is. I have symptoms, and I'm not sure what it is, and that's stressful. Or I know what it is, but it's not going away, right? And so I can sort of cope with it. I can find ways to be okay with it. I can deal with it, but it's there, right? We could think of sometimes money issues can be that way. Mental health can be that way. Sometimes work stress can be that way. Let's just say mental health. We can sort of imagine a lot. These are just meant to be a few examples. But the idea here is any stress that sits and is not resolved will tend to just fill our stress cup. One stress that's been pretty persistent for a good while has been COVID, right? Part of that is because, one, it's created new questions we've never had to answer before, right? Like, how will we relate to each other? And different people have different values on how we ought to relate, and how do we care for each other and manage those tensions. And but also, things change a lot, right? Like, what are you supposed to be doing? Well, if you go back to the very beginning, you know what I mean? And then we'll just keep listening. Well, it's changing again. Well, keep listening. It's changing it, right? But that takes a certain amount of bandwidth, right? That takes a certain amount of attention to be monitoring, which can be exhausting, right? It's just something that's in the stress cup, taking up space, that wasn't there before, now it is. Okay. So, when our stress cup is full and stress comes in, then kind of spill out over the edges, right? Lots of times we'll think, this most recent thing is what I am mad at, or this is what I'm bothered by. This most recent thing, that's the problem, right? Like, it's a stress, like it probably is stress. But man, there's a whole picture underneath that it also matters. And so we can begin to notice some just signs that our stress cup is pretty full, right? Everybody can kind of pick these things up. For me, when my stress cup is empty or very low, then I'm a pretty good listener. I'm pretty patient, pretty kind, right? When my stress cup is full, much more irritable, much more impatient. You can feel it in your body sometimes. Like, I'll get tension across the back of my shoulders. I'll get headaches, right? I'll be tired much more often. I have a lot of fatigue. It's just like, my stress cup's really full. When the stress cup is really full, it can kind of feel like carrying a bucket completely full of water. And the idea is, as long as nothing goes wrong, right? As long as nobody bothers me, as long as everything's okay, I can hold this together. But man, if there's any disruption, I'm spilling over, right? So I used to help get my son on the school bus, and my schedule worked out that I could get him on the school bus, and I had just enough time after he went that I could get to work on time, right? And so it could happen that right before the school bus comes, he's kind of squirming around at the table, right? Spill cereal all over himself, right? Now, if my stress cup is low, then I'll probably say something like, "Ooh, all right, well, okay, buddy, let's hurry, let's try and get changed, let's hustle up," right? That's probably what I'll say. Now, if he does the exact same thing, but, man, I'm stressed about work and I'm behind and I've got a bunch on my mind, if my stress cup is full and he does the exact same thing, "Ethan, what's the matter with you? Why are you fussing around so much? Hurry up, we're going to be late," right? Like, I'm going to snap at him. It's very little to do with what he's doing, right? What's my state at the time? So that's the stress cup. It goes up and down. Everybody can kind of usually notice if they're asking themselves, oh, what are my clues that I'm more stressed, right? When people blow up, sometimes they blow up and it's more like anger or snapping, irritability. Sometimes theirs is overwhelm. They get a lot more anxious or nervous. Some people retreat inward. They get depressed. It's almost like I'm holding together as much as I can. Now there's too much. I just give up, right? I'm just exhausted. It goes up and down. So one question you might ask about your stress cup is, that's great, but what do I do about it? Right? Okay, so I will go into a little bit more detail about some of these options tomorrow, but I'll at least give some picture now. When you're looking at your stress cup, it partly depends on what is going on with you, okay? So, if for you are taking a lot on and saying yes to a lot of things, then you might have too much stress coming in too quickly, right? In which case, if that's you, what will help the most is some form of boundary, some form of sort of blocking how much comes in. So, when my son was a little younger, I ran a couples Bible study, a couples life group for my church, and then I would coach my son's basketball team, and then the church asked, well, can you do like Sunday morning with the little kids? I said, oh yeah, no, I get it. Like, sure, I can help out. I'll do the little kids, and then. Baseball season came around, and they couldn't find, any coaches for my son's age. And, could I coach? I was like, yeah, I can coach. I could not coach. I could not coach. In that moment when they were asking me, I kind of felt like, I bet you I could do that, right? But as soon as I started, I realized I had said yes to too many things. I was much more impatient and flustered throughout that season, right? I did a couple of things. I told the church, like, hey, I can finish out the month for like the little kids, but I have to stop doing that. And then I got a bunch of assistant coaches for baseball, and then said, I'm just not going to do that again, going forward. But it was a lot of overwhelm. If you haven't coached baseball before, I was shocked at the weather cancellations and contacting every kid and rescheduling and getting with fields. I am impressed by the people who do that well. So, when the season ended, it let up. I felt a lot better. It felt like, oh, okay, this is great again, right? Like, that was clearly the problem in that season. And if I were better with saying no to some things, or more aware of how full I actually was, then I could have avoided some of that. But for some of us, that's where we'll get the biggest relief. It's figuring out what we need to say no to. For some of us, that's not the issue, right? Like, no, we do pretty good with that. We have good boundaries with saying no. So then, okay, that's my attempt at drawing a spigot. There's a few ways of letting stress out. And so, I would put them in two different categories. I would say, one is anything that we do to address stress. So, If I'm really stressed financially, then getting financial coaching, writing a budget, working at, okay, I'm addressing the issue, right? If I, a lot of the things that fill us up are, we usually try to solve what we can solve in the things that bottle up, or the things we need help with. So figuring out how to get that help, maybe I'm addressing it, right? But yeah, as I'm overwhelmed with chores and stresses and this or that, that's one method of getting it out, is I'm just going to address it. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to engage it, right? The other method of getting stress out is what I would call recharging. I'll talk more about recharging in a second. We'll get into more detail there. But it's just a way of getting away from stress. Let's just say it that way, a way of getting away from stress. And what people will tend to do, oftentimes, is we tend to more naturally be good at one or those or the other, okay? And so people who spend a lot of time addressing stress but don't know how to give themselves a break, right? The problem with that is you tend to burn out, right? Like you're just solve it, fix, go, and we just get exhausted. So for those of us who do that, learning how to get away from stress will be the biggest, that'll be the biggest bang for our buck, right? That'll help us the most. Now, some of us are great at getting away from stress, right? Our spouses hate that. Some of us can avoid stress a lot. The problem with that has its benefits, right? Okay, there's less on us, we're less glued to it, we have more perspective, that's useful. But our things never really get solved. They never get addressed. So they tend to just keep bottling up and feeling even bigger. So if that's us, then working on addressing the stresses will give us the most help here, okay? So there's no one way to say, what will help you the most with stress, right? It sort of depends on what's happening in your stress life. But I would kind of think of those three big categories, right? Do I need to say no to some things with boundaries? Do I need to figure out other ways of engaging my stress, or maybe getting help to address some of the things that are in here? Or do I need to learn how to take some breaks and be okay giving myself permission to take some breaks, right? Okay, so I want to pause just a second on this because I'm going to turn the page and do another model here for the second part. We're going to have more extended time for questions at the end, but are there any questions on this part of it so far? Maybe not. Maybe it'd help me just to get some head nod. Is this make sense to anybody? Is this sort of feels like, yeah, I can see stress doing that. Yeah, okay, that helps. Okay. So I want to explore self-care or recharging or some other, let's maybe put this here. Ways of recharging. So at first I just thought of this as doing something you enjoy, but the more that I thought about it, the more I kind of began to kind of look into, how do we be good at self-care, right? Everybody has heard the term self-care, and anybody can say, okay, right, doing things that you enjoy, okay. But if we're to look at it a little deeper, what are the different ways of taking care of ourselves, and how do we, if we're going to engage that, how do we do that well? What does that look like? So I sort of think of 4 different, maybe I'll just do them this way. I don't know, you might think of them as batteries. 4 different batteries. And each battery is a different topic. So the first battery I'm going to call social. This is our social battery. Some of us are doing great socially, right? Some of us, social is where we're lacking the most. And they sort of think about, well, what goes into the social one? Well, even the different ways of being social might change for us. So, for example, I get a lot of time with my kids. I love my kids. I get a lot of time with my kids. They're at a great age where they still like being around me. And so I'm not lacking in time with my kids, right? Like that part of my social life isn't depleted, right? Now there are people that do feel like, man, I just need, like what really feels good is when I'm able to spend more time with my kids, right? Like I just don't have the time for that. Okay, then that's part of your social. Maybe it's going on dates with your wife, right? Or husband. Maybe it's going on dates. It could be hanging out with friends, right? Having a game night. I have 3 brothers. We try and get together about every other month or so and play games and have some intentional time to just hang out, right? If I go too long without either dates with my wife or hanging out with my brothers or friends, then it just sort of feels like something's missing a little bit, right? Sometimes this social is coming to a retreat, right? Kind of being where the energy is, being around people, going to retreats or concerts or sporting events, right? Kind of being out and around. Some people, man, if you feel trapped in the house too much, it just starts driving you nuts. And you just kind of want to be where there are people and things happening. So that's our social battery, okay? We have a spiritual battery. A spiritual battery gets filled in different ways too, right? Some of us get a lot out of worship, like public singing, like that is meaningful. Some of us, we enjoy it, we do it. But we're really looking forward to the message, right? Like we're really looking forward to the message. Some of us really enjoy serving, right? Like that's sort of what fills our spiritual batteries, is going out, helping others, doing projects, like serving. Some people may be learning podcasts. So for some people, it's a lot more private, right? Silence and solitude, prayer. My own sort of spiritual rhythm is I usually have about 20 minutes or so 20 to 30 minutes of silence before the other people in my house wake up. And that's time for me to just, I might read a little, but it's mostly praying. And for me, praying isn't doing much speaking. It's mostly just listening. But that is like, okay, that's a big part of my rhythm. When our schedule changes, and our schedule did change recently, where, my wife switched jobs, and now like our morning routines sort of jumbled up, and now I take kids in the morning. Then it messes with like, my self-care that I had sort of laid out, right? So I have to find ways, different seasons of life, different ways. I have to kind of readjust. All right, how do I accomplish this? I'll do, we do our day of rest, our church once a week. Once a month, I'll do usually about 4 hours of silence. And again, it's a way to like check in spiritually. I'm more of an introvert, so it's like a lot of just alone with God is what sort of gives me the biggest bang for the buck. But that's a rhythm, it's a pattern, it's sort of built in, it's intentional, it's scheduled into my life to help keep me charged, right? And if on my sort of once a month day, I am exhausted, like I'm trying to just have some silence and some prayer and connection, and I'm like falling asleep, well, that's speaking to me, right? That's saying, oh man, my rhythm is not great. My past month has been too much, right? Like it's a wake up to, all right, what adjustments do I need to make so I don't keep running at a pace that is wearing me down? What gives us meaning, what gives us purpose? That's our spiritual battery. We have one, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it our fun battery. We have a fun battery. Some of these have overlap, right? Like, I can do game night with my friends. That's pretty social, and that's fun. There's overlap, right? Sometimes they don't overlap. Sometimes my fun battery is I'm going to sit by myself and read a book. I'm going to work on a puzzle. I'm just going to go for a walk. I'm going to walk in the park, walk in the woods. But we have our fun battery, things that we enjoy, hobbies, interests, things that we enjoy. And we have we'll call this our physical battery. The physical battery be things like sleep, diet, exercise. I won't go into tons of depth on all those, but those are all super important parts of our health, our mental health, our stress life. The idea here of naming different batteries is partly just to notice, like, okay, where am I going to get the biggest bang for my buck, right? Like if I'm wanting to invest in my mental health, if I'm wanting to invest in my stress life, my self-care, what's the lowest, right? Because if I invest in my lowest, that gives me sort of the biggest bang for my, that's what was missing. I get the biggest bang for my buck. And if I, I know, my self-care is doing that, and it's sort of the same stuff, and it's already not that bad, right? Like it just feels routine and not as helpful, right? There's a couple of other principles just to pay attention to when you're engaging in self-care. One is anticipation is self-care. Anticipation can be helpful. Knowing you have something fun coming and looking forward to it is itself a boost, right? I don't want to stay glum the whole time up until this thing that I'm looking forward to, this fun thing. Just stay glum up to it, and then I show up. Okay, now I'm there, right? With whatever attitude I've got. All right, now I'm here. I'm missing a lot if I bring it up to my mind. I have this fun thing coming that I have planned for myself and I'm looking forward to. I get a boost. I do this every day, multiple times a day. My first thing that I look forward to is my morning cup of coffee. I'm a big fan of my morning cup of coffee, and I know that's coming. So I can go to bed at night and think, oh, you know what's next? My morning coffee is what's next, right? I can sit through a pretty tough meeting knowing that I have a nice lunch afterwards, right? Like, no, I got a good thing coming, right? Sometimes they're further out, right? Oh, I've got a game night planned in like a month and a half, right? Like, but every day I could usually think of something that I can enjoy, that I can look forward to, that I can, like, oh, okay, that's next. Anticipation. The other is with self-care, there are diminishing returns. Diminishing returns, the more we invest in something, it does not continue to give us the same benefit. Here's an example. If I have a sort of a favorite TV show that I enjoy watching, and I look forward to, maybe my spouse and I watch together and we talk about, that is a boost, right? If I turn on the TV and I sit there and watch show after show because I can't think of anything else to do, that's not much of a boost. I don't feel much better afterwards. I don't get much energy from it. In fact, I feel kind of lazy about it, right? It's not just what we do, but how we go about doing what we do that can make something useful, okay? Okay. So, this is, maybe I'll leave this up. So here's the idea for stress. We all have a stress cup. It goes up and down every day. We can pay attention to our signs that tell us that we're up, and we can think about what we need to bring us back down, right? We can say no to things. We can address our issues. And we can find ways of recharging. I think that probably the most common barrier I see to recharging is people feeling like either I don't have time, or I just feel bad. Like, shouldn't I be doing something else? Shouldn't I be doing something for someone else? Like, I'm gonna do something for me? Like, isn't that selfish? Those are the two biggest barriers I hear. On the issue of time, I'll say that we always are able to make time for what's important to us. It's always been true and will remain true that if it is important enough to us, we will make time for it. And about the selfishness, I guess I would say, when we see ourselves with a full stress cup, and we see ourselves being more irritable or impatient, maybe snapping more than we want to, when we see ourselves pushing so hard and feeling burned out, we're not doing the best we can for the people around us living that way. In fact, when we're able to live out of the abundance that God's given us, when we're able to live out of the abundance of our own health, we're able to give so much better. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, we really are not much good for anyone else. So it kind of comes down to that thought of maybe, well, I don't deserve to rest. People only like me. I'm only useful. I'm only valuable if I'm doing something. Boy, that's a big question, right? I believe you have value. I believe that I have value, that God loves me for being his child. And it's not contingent solely on that I'm constantly doing something. I don't view my kids that way, right? Like, I don't love my kids just because they are great workers. They're often terrible workers. I love my kids because they're my kids. And even when they're ornery and hitting each other and in timeout for the third time for spitting, like, even when I still love my kids, right? And if I love my kids, regardless of how they're acting, man, I've got to guess God does that even more. So, give yourself permission to rest. Give yourself permission to recharge. Okay, so keeping it brief, keeping it simple. I wanted to create space for questions, and so I think you guys had cards in your folders, and so feel free to write any questions or comments you want on your cards, and then also I'll field, if anybody has anything, I'll sort of field questions. So what we're doing, okay. I guess I didn't create a lot of time for questions, but I'll field questions as they come up too if anybody wants to ask out loud or give any comments out loud. But, oh yeah, yeah, you're welcome to yell from your seat, but if you'd like to come forward and use the microphone, get on tape. Oh, okay, there we are. Yep, we've got options. So yes, any feedback or questions for me? Or cards? I think I see some cards over here.
The connection with the amount of caring for others as opposed to feeling cared for, and does that enter into the stress level thing at all?
Yes, yeah, great question. So I will go into more detail on that on the second session tomorrow, but you are right. So there's a whole field of study called compassion fatigue, which is oftentimes what people feel when they are constantly giving, right, caring for others, but not doing as well being cared for, and that sense of burnout that can come from that. And so, yeah, it's a great point, just the importance of balance there. If you're giving out, you need to be bringing in. Yeah. Okay. Gr- um, um, I've not seen like solid research on this. What my experience with people has been is it feels like COVID, and I'm not talking about like having had the virus and the virus itself creating some effects, which there's been a little bit of study on that for some people, but the impact of having sort of this ever-present stress that we are constantly monitoring is extra stress in our stress cup. And so whatever it is that we are vulnerable to, that has increased, right? So people who are prone to anxiety, then their anxiety has tended to increase during this season. And the same with depression or anger or anything else. It's sort of whatever you are prone to has increased because of COVID, is what it appears to me, right? Like, I don't want to say more than I know. Like, I don't have research on it. I'll say that both Springhaven and a lot of other mental health centers around, explored a few around Wayne County and whatnot, is probably more full than normal, right? And so it seems like, this increase of people looking for help. Yeah. Okay. Got a couple of questions here I'll do. What if your mind never turns off? And what if your mind never turns off? And what if what comes in are always bad thoughts? What comes in are always bad thoughts? Yeah, that's a big one. It's actually, I think this is a similar question. How do you deal with fear or stress that's in your mind? And maybe it's not even based on reality. If it's like PTSD or OCD, get into those things. If it's related to trauma or obsessive compulsive disorder or I could expound any other type of, mental health disorder or addiction. But this idea of, all right, when I try to rest, my thoughts don't rest, right? And in fact, I stay busy because I'm running from my thoughts. Yeah. I would say that it is important to figure out how to address that issue, okay? There is help for that issue. I spend a lot of time as a counselor talking with people about how to help with that issue. I can say maybe a small amount here, but the first issue is, if you're not comfortable being alone with your own thoughts, then, you're kind of be set up to always be wore down, right? Like, if rest doesn't feel restful, you're set up to be wore down. And so we want to find a way to help rest be restful for you. And so my first piece of advice would be find a way to address it. I would start with a counselor, right? To give some, I don't want to just leave with that, but so how to manage your thoughts. One way that I explain this sometimes is if you imagine a still pond, this quiet, still, peaceful pond, maybe early in the morning, the dew's coming up, there's frogs chirping on the edges, and then you take a rock and you just throw it in the pond, right? And you make it a big kerplunk, a splash, and then the ripples kind of go. And then all throughout the day, while your mind is busy and you're engaged in issues and stress, you're just sort of lobbing rocks. If at the end of the day, for example, you stop throwing rocks in your pond, what happens is the pond stays disrupted, right? But all of those thoughts, but there's still, right? Yeah, it does. Keep waiting. Give it time, and the pond settles. Continue to wait, and the kind of frogs begin to chirp, right? It feels like a peaceful place again. And if we can start and end our day with some moment of peace, that kind of helps bookend our day, our experience. Now, some of you might be saying, well, okay, keep waiting, like that's not going to work. I would suggest try it. I would also say another trick that people will sometimes do that can be helpful, just try and give a couple of quick tips, is writing your thoughts down. So anything you run from, if it's a thought, I would call them an unwanted thought, right? We all have this sort of stream of consciousness of thoughts that just sort of buzz through, and we can't really control what pops up in our stream of consciousness, right? We can control with practice what we focus on, right? What we give attention to, but we don't really control what pops up. Our stream of consciousness is actually a little bit like our Facebook feed, or a little bit like social media feed. Like we don't control what pops up next, but what we focus on tends to inform what comes up next, right? The more we focus on something, the more we'll get similar things like that. But yes, we all have this stream of consciousness. I've got maybe these unwanted thoughts that are buzzing in. My brain feels busy and full. Doing something like writing my thoughts down. I'm just going to list them. All right, I'm sitting by my still pond. What buzzes through? Oh, this thought. Okay, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not afraid of it. It's just a thought. It's not going to hurt me. I'm not like, wow, but that's a terrible thing to think. Yeah, well, okay, you don't control what pops up. It's fine. Just write it down, right? Sit next to your pond. Oh, this thought pops in. Okay, write it down. This one pops up. Write it down. Keep listing your thoughts. The average working memory can only hold about 7 pieces of information at any one time. I feel like I can do less than that. But what our brain will do is when we try to hold more things are important to our brain than what we're holding. Then when we have, say, 8 things, our brain will drop one and pick the other one up. It'll go drop, pick up. But it doesn't want to lose what it just dropped, so it'll drop something else to pick it up. Drop, pick up, drop, pick up, drop, pick. I got 9 things. Drop, drop, pick up, pick up, drop, drop, pick up, pick up. Right? 10. Drop, 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 pick up, drop, drop, drop. It feels like we have 100 thoughts racing around our mind. We do not. It is rare to have more than 10, right? You might, that's okay if you do. But when you write them down, okay, now I see them. I'm not running from it. I'm just observing it. There it is. Right there's my thought. What else? That one. What else? That one. Is that all of them? I think they're all right there. Okay. I don't need to do anything to fix them. I don't need to do anything to change them. But my brain doesn't feel the pressure to remember something that's written right in front of me. It kind of gives my brain permission to let it go. In fact, a lot of people will do this right before bed to help them sleep at night. For most people, if you run from your thoughts all day with busyness, then when they hit you is when you try to sleep, right? And so you lay down to bed, and then now your thoughts are they're moving. But list your thoughts, and it gives your brain permission to let them go, okay? Now, there are obviously additional complications with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and with obsessive-compulsive disorder. These activities by themselves will not solve those 2 issues. You need counseling. There is a lot of counseling. There are a lot of therapists who spend a ton of time studying those things specifically and have a lot of strategies to help you not just give you advice on how to do it, but help walk with you through how to do it. You don't ever have to struggle with that type of thing alone. That's what my whole field spends all of their time working on. Okay. Yeah, who else? Other questions or cards? Comments? And feel free to speak up if you need clarification. I'm sharing something and you're like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, this will work best if it's interactive. Okay. How do dreams figure in to letting you know what issues are causing you stress? That's a good question. So there is a field of study of people who will look at dreams or dream imagery to begin to assess meaning from them. That is not my specialty. Here's what I learn from dreams. I pay attention to the emotion of the dream. So roughly, this is rough, but our left brain handles a lot of logic and reason and communication. I'm primarily using my left brain right now. Most of the time I'm awake and engaging things. I'm using my left brain. Our right brain is much more creative, artistic, expressive. And if we have emotions going on in our lives that we are not processing with our left brain, we're not noticing, we're not naming, we're not aware of, we're not talking about, we're not in tune with, the energy from those feelings don't go away just because you don't notice them. They stay in. And when your brain attempts to process it while you sleep, it will use all sorts of weird imagery. That's my, not an image specialist. All sorts of weird imagery to recreate that feeling. So, a lot of people may have a dream that they're falling, right? That can be a fairly common dream. And again, I don't think that means you have fallen or you will fall or you're going to fall into money, But the emotion of falling is this, I'm out of control. Life is coming at me faster than I can keep up with. I'm feeling out of control. And probably I have that feeling in my awake life somewhere. I maybe am not quite ready to face it or deal with it. I maybe haven't noticed it or named it myself, but I probably have that experience in my life somewhere. And so I kind of pay attention to what's the feeling of this? I'll do it while I'm awake too, right? I'll just be driving down the road and I'll start replaying a conversation in my head that I had 15 years ago. It has no bearing right now at all, right? But I can be curious about what's the emotion under that conversation? Am I experiencing that feeling now, somewhere? Usually there is. It's this thing connect. What's the feeling under it, and am I experiencing it now? Yeah. So there is a whole lot more that people much smarter than me can tell you about dreams, but that's as far as my expertise goes. Yeah, good. Other questions? Okay. Great. Tomorrow we'll talk more about mental health specifically, right? We'll talk some about, we'll get into more details. Learn some of the language, some about maybe diagnosis, We'll learn how to support people with mental illness, how to walk along with people with mental illness, and kind of the relationship, some history of like the church and mental health as well. Okay, so yeah, I think maybe you have some announcements, Steve. Is that right? Somebody? Yep. But yeah, hope to see you again tomorrow. Thanks.
All right, well, before we head out this evening, then I just want to remind you tomorrow morning, beginning at 9, for those of us that recharge with coffee, we will start with coffee. And there'll be coffee, tea, juice, and pastries out in the foyer starting at 9 o'clock. So please feel free to be here for that. And then we'll start the first session at 9:30, and then really everything else you have on the agenda in front of you. And then we will end with lunch, roughly 12:15 or whatever time, but we'll have lunch, and then we will be concluding at that point. So sleep well, and we'll see you here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thanks.